परमे आनंदमयी चैतन्यमयी सत्यमयी परमे आनंदमयी चैतन्यमयी सत्यमयी परमे सत्यमयी परमे सत्यमयी परमे सत्यं ज्ञानं सत्यं ज्ञानं ज्योतिररविन्द सत्यं ज्ञानं सत्यं ज्ञानं ज्योतिररविन्द सत्यं ज्ञानं सत्यं ज्ञानं ज्योतिररविन्द ज्योतिररविन्द ज्योतिररविन्द. So if we question the motivation of our doing, why we do things, why we say things, very often we do things or say things to appear good in people's minds, right? How many of us are afraid of being judged positively or negatively, and that fear of judgment makes us change our words, change our behavior? Does that happen? Yeah. So then, according to Mother, if we live like that, we are not being sincere, because sincerity is to live life only for one pair of eyes, the Mother's eyes. But if we are all the time living, performing for an audience, in that sense we are not being sincere, because the need to appear is always coming from the ego, right? The ego, we've said, is really the need to appear in a certain way in people's eyes. Very simple, very down to earth definition is that the ego is the need to appear in a certain way, and the wounded ego is when it doesn't appear like that, when people perceive you differently from how you want them to perceive you. That's when your ego gets wounded, and that's when you get hurt. But the Mother says that that is actually insincerity. To want to impress people or to shy away from how they think of you is being insincere, because then you're not living for the divine, you're living for the ego. If you need to appear in a certain way, your motivation is ego. Your motivation is not to live for the divine. And it's not just about devotion, but it's really not intelligent to live for the ego, because let's just examine it. Suppose I want to appear good in Neeta's eyes, Now, Neeta's eyes at that moment is her mind, right? She will perceive me based on the thought pattern her mind is churning out in that moment, right? If her mind is churning out a thought pattern that, oh, how beautiful the world is, whatever I do, I'll appear beautiful to her. But if her mind at that moment is churning out a thought pattern, life's terrible, then she'll find fault with whatever she sees in me. So it's a lost battle to keep wanting to appear good in people's minds, because that's something we have least control over. Every mind really is like a kaleidoscope. You've seen those patterns. Every moment the patterns are changing. So if you look at your mind, it's like that. If you look at every other mind, it's like that. So if we want stability in kaleidoscopically changing patterns, we are always going to get frustrated and disappointed, right? Because today this kaleidoscopic pattern of mind receives me as good, and I get attached to that. I want to remain looking good in that mind tomorrow, day after, week after, but it won't happen, because as that mind pattern changes, her perception of me will also change. Notice in your own mind, the same person today is so dear to you, tomorrow how horrible, day after neutral. It's the same person, but in your mind, are you holding equal affection for the person all the time? No. So how do you expect any other mind to hold a constant, happy, equal affection for you? It's not possible. So understand that that's going to fluctuate, and don't bother too much about it, because then you live a very incomplete life if you're all the time going to think about how people think of you, how they judge you, how you appear in their mind. What mother says, what's important is, how are you appearing in mother's eyes? So in the dining hall it's written, no, in Pandi, always behave as if the mother's watching, looking at you, because indeed she always is. But mother's eyes aren't eyes of judgment. They aren't eyes that will fluctuate in their affection for you. Even if you do terrible things, those eyes will still love you, but your actions will have a consequence. So our talk today is for you. How do we start living integrally for the divine? Not for the ego, not for appearance, but how do we change our way of living so that we actually live for the mother and not for how we appear in people's eyes? Because it's an intelligent thing to do, right? People's eyes will keep changing, but mother's eyes are eyes of a constant love, so it's more sensible to invest into those eyes, right? So, mother's words. When you're absolutely sincere, you make a constant effort to live in harmony with the highest ideal of your being, the truth of your being. At every moment, in all that you think, all that you feel, and all that you do, you try as perfectly as possible, as completely as possible, to put yourself in harmony with the highest ideal, or if you're conscious of it, with the truth of your being. Then you have reached true sincerity. And if you're like that, if truly you do not act from egoistic motives or for personal reasons, if you act guided by your inner truth, that is, if you are perfectly sincere, it is absolutely the same to you whether the whole world judges you in one way or another. So beautiful. If you're absolutely sincere, you won't be bothered by people's opinions of you. You won't care whether the whole world judges you in one way or another. In this state of perfect sincerity, you do not need to appear good or to be approved by others. For the first thing you experience when you are in harmony with your true consciousness is that you do not care what you look like. Look like not just in the mirror, but look like in people's minds. You just don't care about it. Whether you look like this or like that, whether you seem indifferent, cold, distant, proud, all this is of no importance, provided I repeat this, you are absolutely sincere. That is, you never forget that you live in order to realize your inner central truth. So it's a tall order because we have lifetimes of conditioning which tells us that we are secure if we look good in so and so's eyes. People who are dear to us, we are very scared of falling from their favor or looking bad in their eyes, or in general also. But according to Mother, that's being insincere, because then you'll play roles in order to be accepted. You won't be authentic. You'll pretend to be something other than what you are. So that takes you away from the truth of your being. Whereas if you live your whole life thinking that you want to live it for, what does it mean to live for the Mother? How will you live for the Mother? Yeah?
I was meditating a little before.
Little louder.
So just before we started, I was meditating, and the moment I opened my eyes and I looked at Sri Aurobindo and the Mother, I got a thought, one line, which I wrote, which is connected to what you just mentioned. I wrote, "There is no better embellishment you can adorn than having grace for humanity."
Lovely. Embellishment is decoration. There is nothing you can decorate yourself better with than grace for humanity. So that's what, when we say live for the Mother, not only for this picture, the Mother is everyone and everything. So treat everyone and everything as if they are the Mother, and come from that truth. How, if Mother is the object of your love, you want to do your best for her. You want to give her the best of yourself. So just like that, wanting to give the best of you to creation, to the world, that is living for the Mother. So Mother Sri Aurobindo says, where one cannot become altogether this, entirely sincere at once, but if one aspires at all times to it and calls in always the aid of the divine Shakti with a true heart and straightforward will, one grows more and more into this consciousness. So then, this is a little poem. It talks about two blossoms. It talks about how when we are connected to our heart and there's a blossom within, it makes everything outside also blossom. But the moment you bloom outside and people notice it, the ego hijacks the blossoming. You start preening to appear to people's eyes rather than blossoming for the sake of the rain that made you blossom. So that's what this poem is about. Deep within, a dance of light yields a bloom. That's of course the psychic coming forward. Hidden from all eyes, it covets itself for the one beloved gaze. The psychic being only cares for the Mother's gaze, that's its nature, and blooms only for his joy, her joy. Suffusing its way to the surface, it makes the surface bloom too. So when the psychic being blossoms and it comes to the surface also starts blooming. It makes the surface bloom too. An ironic distortion seeps in. The outer blooms for the joy of applause and preens before all eyes that care to see. One source, one bloom, two divergent seekings. Yeah, so it's so beautiful. There is one source which creates a blossoming inside and so a consequent blossoming outside. So it's one source, one bloom, but two divergent seeking. The inner blossoming of the psychic being only wants the mother, but the outer blossoming always wants appreciation, endorsement, people to tell you how good you are, feeling disappointed and inadequate when they don't. So these are the two divergent seekings. A spiritual alchemy works to reconcile the two and to merge them into one single efflorescence of supreme beauty. Then there is the second poem called Who. From the submerged depths, a wordless call arises. The submerged depths are your psychic being. So from your psychic being, a wordless call arises. Though lost in the frenzy of the waves that desire different shores, so like there's one seabed which has a depth, the depth is your psychic being, which the aspiration of the psychic being is the wordless call that arises. But the waves of the ocean are always seeking different shores. Yeah? So waves is a surface being. Though lost in the frenzy of the waves that desire different shores, in moments still it is heard. The depth that embraces all shores. So the psychic being is one with everything. What shore can it seek? To whom does it offer its ceaseless oblation? Who receives this incessant self-giving? Who is the beloved of this fathomless love? So again, it's talking about how the depths are constantly sort of giving themselves to the divine like a sunflower to the sun. In Savitri, there's a very evocative image of a being inside us constantly kneeling down in prayer. That's how the psychic being is described. A being within who is constantly kneeling down in prayer. So, who receives this? So the devotee is asking, who does it offer its ceaseless oblation? Who receives this incessant self-giving? Who is the beloved of this fathomless love? Now, words of my Vedanta teacher Partho. What is a centralizing tendency? It is to have a master thought that will govern all other thoughts. For example, I will only have thoughts of the Divine Mother. So, like if you want a country to run well, it needs a central government, right? I mean, if the central government works well, then it keeps the whole country together. If we are the country, we also need a central government, because right now the vital is doing its own thing, the mental is doing its own thing, the physical is doing its own thing, and the psychic is not awake enough to establish rule over all these. So when the psychic comes forward, it centralizes the vital, the mental, the physical around itself. So Partho says that if you have a centralizing tendency, one central thought which you come back to again and again during the day, a thought of everything is the mother, or I want only the mother, or I want to do everything only for her, I want to see her in all beings, then that is the centralizing thought around which our mind and emotions can integrate and be together. Dharan Samarthya, ability to hold a thought in my mind. This is very important. Most of the times we can't hold a thought. Like I'll tell you something beautiful about the mother, it will thrill you, but next instant your mind will wander to something else, isn't it? We can't hold that thought. And even in meditation, we don't have the dharan samarthya. One breath, two breath, we are focused, and then we'll wander away. So dharan samarthya is the ability to hold thoughts of the divine mother, hold a thought in my mind. Swami Vivekananda suggests that we create a tidal wave that dissolves every other thought in the mind. It gives a distinct character to the mind. In yoga, we have to replace all mundane thoughts with thoughts of the divine. Even in the vital, there can be one centralizing feeling of love for the divine that governs all else. This is the integration of the mind and vital around the psychic. So once mother was asked various pointers, like a sadhak said, for the sadhana, is it good to do this, is it good to do that? So the sadhak asked the mother, is it good to read books on your words? So mother said, very good. Sadhak said, is it good to keep trying to think about you the whole day? She said, that is excellent. Every time you think about me, you connect with my consciousness. So it's not natural for us to think about her throughout the day perhaps, but we can cultivate it as a habit. We can even put that timer on our phone every 1 hour, put it down and think of the mother, think of the divine, because the way we are, we'll be lucky if some days even 2 minutes we think about her, isn't it? We get so caught up with other things. So Partho says, even when I'm wallowing in the Prakritik I is the I in nature. I am still the supramental I. Supramental I is my divine self. Deep in my Shraddha, where I'm being manufactured each day, where my self-becoming is being molded, I'm holding the thought that I am the mother, because everything is the mother, no? If I'm seeing everything as the mother, why am I not seeing myself as the mother? So even while I'm wallowing in the Prakritik I is the I in nature, the I in Prakriti. Deep down in my Shraddha, where I'm being manufactured each day, it's so beautiful, no? That all wisdom is manufacturing me each moment. I am holding the thought that I am the mother. If I can hold the thought, my whole life, speech, actions become a sacrifice to that which is the highest in me. Then there is a raising of the quality of being. This is the transformation of Prakriti. Now a gorgeous passage or passages from Synthesis of Yoga of Sri Aurobindo. He talks about the law of sacrifice. He says that the divine in a way sacrificed himself in becoming creation, right? Because the divine is Satchidananda, all beauty, all bliss. But to become existence, he sacrificed all that and became each one of us. And Sri Aurobindo beautifully calls it the law of sacrifice, where in his becoming as us, we have to give back to the divine in all existence. That's the law of, he sacrificed in becoming us, and every time we give to existence, somewhere we are following the law of sacrifice. It's not sacrifice as in martyrdom, but it's a sacrifice of joy. Like in Savitri, there's a beautiful line, a mutual debt binds man to the Supreme. His nature we must put on as he put on ours, right? So Sri Aurobindo says the law of sacrifice is the common divine action that was drawn out into the world in its beginning as a symbol of the solidarity of the universe. It is by the attraction of this law that a divinizing principle, a saving power, descends to limit and correct and gradually to eliminate the errors of an egoistic and self-divided creation. This descent, this sacrifice of the Purusha, the divine soul, submitting itself to force and matter so that it may inform and illuminate them, is the seed of redemption of this world of inconscience and ignorance. So, Mother used to tell this story when she was asked about how creation came to be. She said, I'm going to tell you the story of creation, but don't take it at face value. I've tried to explain something very intricate in very simple terms, so it almost sounds childish. So she had said at the beginning of creation, God emanated 4 beings of life, the being of light, the being of life, the being of truth, and the 4th being was love. Yeah, 4 beings of light. And somewhere along the way they separated from their source. It's always the same thing. Even in Bible, Lucifer was God's brightest angel, but he wanted to be more powerful than God. So ego came in. These beings wanted to be separate from God and be the most powerful. The ego is this, no? To be the best, to be the most. That's the thrust of each ego in us. We always want to be the best, most love, most whatever. So this distortion began from there. And when it began, they changed into the opposite, which is the being of darkness. The being of light became the being of darkness, truth of falsehood, and so on. And that's when the Divine Mother appealed to God and with his permission descended into matter and immersed herself into it as love. So this is called the Holocaust of the Divine Mother, because that was the first aspect of the sacrifice, that she descended into matter as a vibration of love. And Mother says that love is like yeast. Just the way if you add yeast to bread, it rises. It's what makes matter rise in the evolutionary scale. But now it's up to matter to respond to this initial sacrifice and give itself back to the source. That's the law. And that is what weakens the ego. The ego is the falsehood that makes us feel separate, and so we want to stand out. Any urge to stand out always comes from the ego. Any urge to be the best, the most, whatever, always comes from the ego. So the law of sacrifice, and the ego always wants to get. I want more, I want this, I want that. The opposite of it is when it's taught to give selflessly back to the source. So that's the mutual law of sacrifice. And Sri Aurobindo says, this is the mechanism by which the ego in humanity gets weaker and weaker. So further he says, it is the attraction of this law that a divinizing principle, a saving power, descends to limit and correct, and gradually to eliminate the errors of an egoistic and self-divided creation. This descent, this sacrifice of the Purusha, the divine soul submitting itself to force and matter so that it may inform and illuminate them, is the seed of redemption of this world of inconscience and ignorance. For with sacrifice as their companion, says the Gita, the All-Father created these people. The acceptance of the law of sacrifice is a practical recognition by the ego that it is neither alone in the world nor chief in the world. What does this mean? The acceptance of the law of sacrifice is a practical recognition by the ego that it is neither alone in the world nor chief in the world. What does it mean that the acceptance of the law of sacrifice? When does the ego accept this law of sacrifice? Huh? When it knows that it doesn't exist by itself, when it recognizes that its very breath is given to it by the divine. that it's not separate from the divine. When it accepts this, then it wants to give back in gratitude to what has given it so much. For this is the truth in nature, that this ego, which thinks itself a separate, independent being and claims to live for itself, is not and cannot be independent nor separate. Nor can it live to itself even if it would, but rather all are linked together by a secret oneness. For the ego to recognize this secret oneness, even intellectually, is a good start. Each existence is continually giving out perforce from its stock, out of its mental receipts from nature, its vital and physical assets and acquisitions and belongings. A stream goes to all that is around it. That is, without our knowing it, we are always flowing into the whole. Even when we don't want to give ourselves, energetically we are flowing into the whole, because this whole existence is an ocean of energy, right? So, and always again it receives something from its environment gratis or in return for its voluntary or involuntary tribute. For it is only by this giving and receiving that it can affect its own growth, while at the same time it helps the sum of things. At length, though at first slowly and partially, we learn to make the conscious sacrifice. Even in the end, we take joy to give ourselves and what we envisage as belonging to us in a spirit of love and devotion to that which appears for the moment other than ourselves and is certainly other than our limited personalities. So the whole movement of the ego is this: it wants to draw the universe in, and very often it plays in such different ways. For example, suppose a situation arises where you're asked to give something you don't want to give. Instead of recognizing that it's your smallness, you start disliking the people who are asking you for it. Do you recognize this? Yeah? And that's when you need to be sincere and really recognize that there's nothing bad in these people. The ego will love creating enemies, love to say they are bad, but they are doing a very normal thing in asking you for whatever. But because you don't want to give it, you find reasons to dislike them. And sometimes we've spent so many years being like that that we don't recognize it. Are you with me? Do you know what I'm saying? We go on disliking the people, but they are just instruments of the universal sacrifice, right? It's just the divine through them asking you for what belongs to the divine, isn't it? So it's very beautiful to catch the ego, not buy into it, expose its little hiding places, offer it to mother and change. All my life I have held this thing in my hand and resented people who've asked me for it. Now let me give away the resentment and open my fist a little more. Let me give just that little trickle, a little more. And I'll start enjoying giving so much that eventually I'll see that I was the one who was suffering when my fists were clenched. If my hands are like this, I am the one who's filled. No, it's like the sun. If you look at the sun, he's in all our Vedas, he's the symbol of wisdom, no? Surya Bhagwan is the Vedic deity of wisdom. And we would never think that in one shaft of sunlight, there is all the wisdom of the Upanishads and more. But energetically, it is so. And the sun is constantly generating light. But there's, as far as we know, there's nothing on the sun that benefits from the light, right? It constantly makes light to give to other planets, earth, whatever. So its very nature is to give, and as mother says, only those who want to take are unhappy. Those who are in a state of constantly wanting to give, they'll never be unhappy. Therefore the sun is always bright. So much to learn from the sun. I mean, we are being foolish if we think that the sun is just non-living ball of light. Nothing in the universe is non-living. If you look at the earth, when that part of the earth which turns away from the sun has night, but when it comes back to face the sun doesn't reject it that you turned away from me, right? The next day the sun will happily light it up and bring it day again. But we are so small, we keep holding grudges. You turned away from me, you affronted me, because my ego wants you to be in a certain way with me. I want you to be a puppet. Each ego wants people in their lives to be puppets who will be exactly how they want them to be. And the moment the puppet changes, becomes something different, then my whole feeling towards the person changes, isn't it? So I don't have the heart of the sun. Whether you turn away from me in the night of your being, whether you turn towards me in the day of your being, every time you come back, I'm going to only shine. So that is giving. If you really want to know the heart of giving, contemplate the sun, because the sun is really, therefore Rumi says that after all these years, the sun never asks the earth, never tells the earth, you owe me. And what happens with a love like that? The whole universe gets lit. After all these years, the sun never tells the earth, you owe me. And this is what our ego is always telling people we are in relationship with. No, I did so much for you. You should at least behave like this with me. You should at least not say this to me. You should at least say that to me. But look at the sun. After all these years where it's just made the earth blossom, it never tells the earth you owe me, right? So that is if we want to learn of the law of sacrifice, it's from the heart of the sun. Constantly giving without wanting anything in return, just for the joy of giving. And therefore the sun is, we always associate sunshine with joy, right? Because it actually has a vibration of joy. In the northern countries where there's no sun for some months, because how they are placed, it's known that depression is very high. Because the sun brings joy, it has that vibration. In fact, people who are depressed, now even doctors are telling them sit half an hour in the sunlight and it does something magical to you. So, for this is the truth in nature, that this ego which thinks itself a separate independent being and claims to live for itself is not and cannot be independent nor separate. Nor can it live to itself even if it would, but rather all are linked together by a secret oneness. Each existence is continually giving out perforce from its stock of its mental receipts from nature, or its vital and physical assets and acquisitions and belongings. A stream goes to all that is around it, and always again it receives something from its environment gratis, free, or in return for its voluntary or involuntary tribute. For it is only by this giving and receiving that it can effect its own growth, while at the same time it helps the sum of things. At length, though at first slowly and partially, we learn to make the conscious sacrifice. Even in the end, we take joy to give ourselves and what we envisage as belonging to us in a spirit of love and devotion to that which appears for the moment other than ourselves and is certainly other than our limited personality. So the other person who I'm giving to appears to be other than myself, but it's really myself. And sometimes we all experience the joy of just giving, the joy of bringing a smile to a person's face. We don't want anything back in return. It just feels good to do it. All true love and all sacrifice are in their essence nature's contradiction of the primary egoism and its separative error. It is her attempt to turn from a necessary first fragmentation towards a recovered oneness. So beautiful. I'll read it again. All true love and all sacrifice are in their essence nature's contradiction of primary egoism. Primary egoism is gimme, drawing everything into myself. So ego's movement is this, love and self-giving, the movement is like that. So the two movements are contradictory. It is her attempt, it is nature's attempt to turn from a necessary first fragmentation towards a recovered oneness. All unity between creatures is in its essence a self-finding, when I find myself in the other, a fusion with that from which we have separated, a discovery of oneself in others. The profounder idea of the worldwide law is the heart of the teaching about works given in the Gita. A spiritual union with the highest by sacrifice, an unreserved self-giving to the eternal is the core of its doctrine. So, when we read Mother, we'll constantly come across this word self-giving, no? And I've often wondered what that means. But if you read the chapters on ascent of sacrifice and synthesis of yoga, it is so beautifully described, the whole science and process of self-giving. What self-giving is really first recognizing yourself in the so-called other and doing for the so-called other what you do for yourself. So it's not being virtuous, it's not being good, it's not being moralistic, it's just being spiritually intelligent, right? Because if this hand is hurt and I put balm on it, I won't pat myself on the shoulder for doing it. No, it's logical to do it. So in that sense, the whole world is one body, and in giving to anyone, I'm actually giving to myself. And to constantly remember this, function from this and live from this, that is at a very surface level self-giving. But do read those chapters, they are marvelous. Synthesis of yoga.
This is also true. If I harm somebody else, it's tantamount to
Of
harming
course,
myself.
you instantly harm yourself, because the moment you harm, you create that energy. And the first vessel that receives that negative energy is yourself. See, Mansi, you can't do this with your mind, because I was just discussing with somebody yesterday. Ignorance of the mind can't be solved by the mind. You have to go to a space beyond the mind and from there work on the mind, because the mind will just keep playing gymnastics. So the best thing is to connect with that space inside you. That's all you need to do, Mansi. Then the rest, that wisdom will guide you. The wisdom will show you the truth behind that. Because if I tell you, see the mother in that person, and you try to see it through your mind, you'll feel frustrated. You won't be able to. But you will see the mother in that person if little bit you make inroads into the mother inside you. So if you go within, connect over there, and from there look, the whole perspective changes. our sacrifice, Sri Aurobindo says, is not a giving without any return or any fruitful acceptance. This is page 109 of Synthesis of Yoga. Our sacrifice is not a giving without any return or any fruitful acceptance from the other side. It is an interchange between the embodied soul and conscious nature in us and the eternal spirit. For even though no return is demanded, yet there is the knowledge deep within us that a marvelous return is inevitable. So beautiful. So for even though no return is demanded, I'm doing this for the mother. I'm not demanding a return, but I have an intuition that a marvelous return is going to come. The soul knows that it does not give itself to God in vain, claiming nothing. It yet receives the infinite riches of the divine power and presence. Yeah? So, every time you do anything for the divine, you are filled with the joy of the divine presence. You're filled with something quite marvelous. Anything you do for the ego will fill you with unease and fear of loss or arrogance or something which feels uneasy. But anything you do for the divine instantly fills you with joy. Something as simple as those of us who decorate flowers here before darshan days or clean, it just fills you with so much joy. Or I remember my work doesn't allow me to do this often, but once we had we put up a stall of Sri Aurobindo's books at Kala Ghoda, the fest, yeah. And just once I could make time to be there at the bookstall, and I can't tell you how happy I felt. I did nothing, just gave books, wrote receipts, but it just filled me with so much joy. And so anything you do, if you do for the divine like that, it just fills you with tremendous joy. Just try it. Hetal always needs helping hands here. Once a week, come and offer to do something for her. Believe me, it won't be for her, it will be for yourself. You will go out of it so much richer. But it's not just at the center. In one sense, the whole world is mother center, right? But we don't work in that spirit. We always work with the idea of achievement, with the idea of profiting, with the idea of pleasing people, appearing good to people. But suppose we change that motivation to, I really want to do it for you, and come from that space. Louder.
So if you're doing something from the mind space, it just feels like, will it happen properly? How will it go or not? Either it's fear or it's meeting the expectation or something. And I've noticed anytime you do something from a space of doing it for the divine, I've experienced my own self that, even though that must be something I'm doing for the first time, I wouldn't know at all. But I'm still at ease because there is that faith.
Yes.
That it's guided, it will take care of it on its own. So just that activity that I know, even if it is something at the office, you would have done it a zillion times, but I still have that sense of how will it go, I hope it goes well, I hope the superiors like it. But the moment it's from this space, even something brand new doesn't feel scary.
Yes, because you can't fear being judged by the divine. If all other people, you will have fear of judgment, but if you're doing it for the divine won't judge you. Whatever you give sincerely, she's going to accept.
And it need not be just this particular action or that. I can do
everything for the divine. There's that Bryan Adams song, no? Everything I do it for you. It's so true. So whoever the recipient, whatever the gift, it is the supreme, the eternal in things, who receives and accepts. So beautiful. Recipient is the person who receives the gift. Whatever gift you're giving, it is the supreme, the eternal in things who receives and accepts it, even if it be rejected or ignored by the immediate recipient. So it's very beautiful when you give something to someone. The form of that person may reject it, but the divine in that person will always accept it if you give it with a heart. So that's what he's saying over here. In one of Mother's prayers, in prayers and meditation, she had written, I'm sure metaphorically, but she had written that I prepared food and offered it to man. Man rejected it, so I offered it to God and he accepted it with joy. Something to that effect. So it's like that. When you're giving to someone, if you're giving to the frontal person, you'll want to be thanked, you'll want to be appreciated, you'll want return at some future time. But if you're giving it to the divine in the person, then you won't come from all that space. The moment you give it out of that space, you'll be filled with so much joy that you won't want anything else. The one entirely acceptable sacrifice is a last and highest and uttermost self-giving. It is that surrender made face to face with devotion and knowledge, freely and without any reserve, to one who is at once our immanent self, the environing constituent all, the supreme reality beyond this or any manifestation, and secretly all these together concealed everywhere, the immanent transcendence. For to the soul that wholly gives itself to him, God also gives himself altogether. Only the one who offers his whole nature finds the self. Only the one who can give everything enjoys the divine all everywhere. Only a supreme self-abandonment attains to the supreme. Only the sublimation by sacrifice of all that we are can enable us to embody the highest and live here in the immanent consciousness of the transcendent spirit. So there's a beautiful story in the life of Narsi Mehta. Narsi Mehta was a sage who lived in the 1400s. He's regarded as the father of Gujarati music. He composed the famous Vaishnav Janto, which was Gandhiji's favorite bhajan. And he lived in the state of total self-giving to Krishna. So he never asked for anything, but there were always very sticky situations in his life, and there was once a time when his son had to go and collect his bride. Those days there was child marriage, no? And when the girl came of age, so they got married and the girl went and lived at the parents' house till she achieved puberty. Then the husband had to go and collect the bride. And you have to go with gifts and a procession, and there were all those traditions. And Narsi Mehta didn't have any money because whatever he got, he gave away. He lived like that. And he got a note from the bride, his son's father-in-law, that come immediately or I'm calling off the marriage, you've delayed it too long. So Narsi Mehta made a leap of faith. He said, okay, I don't have any gifts, but Krishna will take care of it. So he started walking, and he didn't have very rich friends. His friends were people who were ordinarily dressed. They had emaciated cows instead of a royal procession. So it was like a very poor looking procession that headed towards the bridegroom's wife's house. And along the way, suddenly they were joined by this very rich procession of horses and stately men led by a very, very stately person. And that person delivered all the gifts to Narsi's son's father-in-law. And Narsi Mehta and the person asked him, but who are you? So that stately man who had come giving all the gifts said, I'm Narsi's servant. And then when Narsi Mehta was told this, that all these gifts have come, and there was this beautiful man, and when he was asked, he said he was your servant. And Narsi heard this, and one version of the story says that he just went into a total trance and disappeared somewhere into the outskirts, because of course he recognized it was none other than his Krishna. So that's what Sri Aurobindo is saying, the soul that gives itself totally to God, God also gives himself totally to you. So it's like a mutual thing. The amount you give yourself to God, God gives to you. The amount you give yourself to the ego, that much you cut yourself away from God. So this, in short, is the demand made on us, that we should turn our whole life into a conscious sacrifice. Every moment and every movement of our being is to be resolved into a continuous and a devoted self-giving to the eternal. All our actions, not less the smallest and most ordinary and trifling than the greatest and most uncommon and noble, must be performed as consecrated acts. Our individualized nature must live in the single consciousness of an inner and outer movement dedicated to something that is beyond us and greater than our ego. No matter what the gift or to whom it is presented by us, there must be a consciousness in the act that we are presenting it to the one divine being in all beings. Our commonest or most grossly material actions must assume this sublimated character. When we eat, we should be conscious that we are giving our food to that presence in us. It must be a sacred offering in a temple, and the sense of a mere physical need or self-gratification must pass away from us. Even in those things in which nature is herself very plainly the worker, and we only the witnesses of her work and its containers and supporters, there should be the same constant memory and insistent consciousness of her work and of its divine master. Our very inspiration and respiration, our very heartbeats can be and must be made conscious in us as the living rhythm of the universal sacrifice. Yeah, universal sacrifice, inhalation, the thought that God has entered me. Exhale, I give to God. So even your inhalation is, you're pulling in something and you're giving out something. Something entering, something leaving. It is clear that a conception of this kind and its effective practice must carry in them three results that are of a central importance for our spiritual ideal. It is evident to begin with that even if such a discipline is begun without devotion, it leads straight and inevitably towards the highest devotion possible, for it must deepen naturally into the completest adoration imaginable, the most profound God love. There is bound up with it a growing sense of the divine in all things, a deepening communion with the divine in all our thought, will and action. And at every moment of our lives, a more and more moved consecration to the divine of the totality of our being. So, first step is there is a growing God love. You can't give to something unless you love, right? If you love someone, you automatically exceed your boundaries of convenience to give that person, right? So, to give to the all of existence as if it's God, first there has to grow in you a profound God love. That's the first thing Sri Aurobindo says. The practice of this yoga demands a constant inward remembrance of the one central liberating knowledge and a constant active externalizing of it in works comes in too to intensify the remembrance. In all is the one self, the one divine is all. All are in the divine, all are the divine, and there is nothing else in the universe. This thought or this faith is the whole background until it becomes the whole substance of the consciousness of the worker. So, for our purposes today, two things to remember: to constantly feed our love for the divine, and to constantly remember that everything is the divine. So, then there's a kind of softening towards everything in existence because everything is only that. Whatever we see and hear, whatever we touch and sense, all of which we are conscious, has to be known and felt by us as that which we worship and serve. So beautiful. Sri Aurobindo says, whatever we hear, whatever we touch and sense, all of which we are conscious, has to be known and felt by us as that which we worship and serve. All has to be turned into an image of the divinity, perceived as a dwelling place of His Godhead, enveloped with the eternal omnipresence. Lastly, the practice of this yoga of sacrifice compels us to renounce all the inner supports of egoism, casting them out of our mind and will and actions, and to eliminate its seed, its presence, its influence out of our nature. All must be done for the divine. All must be directed towards the divine. Nothing must be attempted for ourselves as a separate existence. Nothing done for others, whether neighbors, friends, family, country, or mankind, or other creatures, merely because they are connected with our personal life and thought and sentiment, or because the ego takes a preferential interest in their welfare. In this way of doing and seeing, all works and all life becomes only a daily dynamic worship and service of the divine in the unbounded temple of His own vast cosmic existence. Life becomes more and more the sacrifice of the eternal in the individual, constantly self-offered to the eternal transcendence. So, this is a tall order indeed, to constantly remember and do everything for the divine. But where would we even start? Because, yeah, isn't that a valid question? Right now, coming here and putting flowers and all, we may remember. But in our day, how do we do what we do for the divine? Where would we start? Anyone? So each of you decide one activity which you do on a daily basis, and just make a commitment that I'll try to do this one thing, keeping mother in mind and for her. Start small. If I tell you to do it in everything, there will be an intention, but maybe it won't happen. But just decide that this one thing, I will remember mother at the beginning and tell her I'm doing it for you. In the middle, I'll remember her, and at the end, I'll remember her. See how it feels. If it feels good, you'll want to do it more and more through the day. And what does it mean to do it for her? Let's take an example. Suppose I'm doing some work, some paperwork. What does it mean to do it for the mother? I'm studying or I'm doing paperwork. What will it mean to do it for the mother?
Full concentration and
What?
full awareness and full concentration and do it.
Full concentration. What else? Concentration you can have even for the ego, no? But what does it mean to do it for the mother?
It's surrender.
One is you surrender the fruit of the results to her. Two is even, well, the paper you're writing on is the mother. How you handle the pen is the mother. Am I just scratching on the paper? Am I flinging the pens around? Because even that is mother, right? Whatever you're handling, remind yourself it's the mother. If you're doing paperwork, writing an email or a letter to someone, remember that I'm writing to the mother. I mean, it'll change the whole thing. I know that in the corporate it's difficult because you don't always write emails or whatever to what your mind calls pleasant people. But if you remind yourself that whether they appear pleasant or unpleasant, everyone's the mother. And I come from that space of handling everything as the mother, that's when I'm doing it for her. Doing it mindfully. If the mother was in front of you, you do everything mindfully, right? But she is in front of us all the time. So doing it from that space. So decide any one thing in which you'll bring your full mind into believing that every ingredient in that activity is mother, and you're offering it to her, and see how it works. Huh.
Before you say that when you want to be the best, it's all ego.
Huh.
For a sportsman,
Huh.
he wants to be the best. It's a competitive thing that he's doing for a living.
Huh.
How does he, what would his psychology be?
Yeah, so sports, the way they are nowadays taught, they are extremely competitive. If you look at a national level athlete, gymnast, they have more pressure than corporates have. But I don't think that's productive. And it's very difficult, but it's up to the sportsman to do the sport as if he wants the best in himself to come out, not to be better than anyone else, but to bring out the best in himself. And I think that's when that is your ambition, that I don't want to be better than anyone else, but I want to be the best version of myself. Then you put the right foot forward.
But even that is ego, right?
That, why is that ego? The best in you is the divine, no? If I want to work from the best in me, I want to work from the best, from the divine in me. And see, if you do anything in an average way, you won't enjoy it. The enjoyment comes when you bring excellence into works. You know the Gita, it says yoga is skill in works. Because anything you do excellently has the God touch. I feel it, you wouldn't be excellent if God hadn't touched it. So every time you bring excellence into your work, you're inviting footfalls of God into that work. And that has nothing to do with being better than anyone else. So now there's this piece, the mother's eyes. Liquid light flows from your eyes. The devotee is telling the mother, liquid light flows from your eyes. Their dew condensate moistens the whole universe. It's like light is condensing into dew that is moistening the whole universe. It's a metaphor. The mother's eyes are giving out a light which is becoming that very universal dew, which is moistening the whole universe, softening its hardness into the omnipresent melting pearl. So the dew is like an omnipresent, present everywhere melting pearl, whose whiteness invisibly permeates the black and the grey. So that darkness truly is a magic of self-hidden light. So Mansi's question, that if somebody is really terrible, how do we see the divine in them? By just remembering this, that it's actually light from mother's eyes which is permeating everything and everyone everywhere, whose whiteness invisibly permeates the black and the grey. So that darkness truly is a magic of self-hidden light, and all of me longing to be moistened by this precious dew gives itself to you, to your eyes, to be consumed by them. So that could be a good practice. You should try it. You should, in fact, whenever we are feeling very low, the best thing is to go in front of any picture of the mother and just look into her eyes, because mother has written, and it's an experience for many of us, I'm sure, that from her feet power flows, but from her eyes light comes out which reaches the psychic being. So if you just make eye contact with her, and mother says, I'm present in every picture of mine, right? So if you just make eye contact with her eyes, it's amazing what wisdom can flow into you from just that. So you could try making the eye contact and telling her that I want to see you in this person, show me how it can be done, and see how it works. Okay, this is a very beautiful practical piece. It's a WhatsApp forward I got, but I found it so touching, and to think that it's true. To be honest, it is the first time I have seen someone with such an opportunity before them. It says, where to stop is satisfaction. This is an episode from Kaun Banega Crorepati. In a recent episode, Neeraj Saxena was the fastest to answer the fastest finger round and took the hot seat. He sat very calmly without shouting, dancing, crying, raising his hands or hugging Amitabh Bachchan. Neeraj is a scientist, a PhD and a vice chancellor of a university in Calcutta. He has a pleasant and simple personality. He considers himself fortunate to have worked with Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, and mentioned that initially he thought only about himself. But under Kalam's influence, he began thinking about others and the nation as well. He may not be a devotee of Sri Aurobindo, but he is really living the law of sacrifice, as you'll see. Neeraj started playing. He used the audience poll once, but since he had the double dip lifeline, he got the chance to use it again. He answered all the questions with ease, and his intelligence was impressive. He won 3,20,000 and an equivalent bonus, and then there was a break. After the break, Amitabh announced, let's proceed, Dr. Saab, here comes the 11th question. Just then Neeraj said, sir, I would like to quit. Amitabh was surprised, someone playing so well with 3 lifelines still left and a good chance to win 1 crore. If he answered the question right, he would get 1 crore. Was quitting. He asked, this has never happened before. Neeraj calmly replied, other players are waiting. and they are younger than me. They should also get a chance. I have already won a lot of money. I feel what I have is enough. I do not desire more. Amitabh was stunned, and there was a moment of silence. Then everyone stood up and applauded him for a long time. Amitabh said, "We have learnt a lot today. It is rare to see a person like you." So, after he quit the game, a girl took the hot seat and shared her story. "My father threw us out, including my mother, just because we were 3 daughters. Now we live in an orphanage. I thought if Neeraj had not quit being the last day, no one else would have gotten a chance. Because of his sacrifice, this poor girl got an opportunity to earn some money. In today's world, people are not ready to give up even a single penny from their inheritance. We see fights and even murders over it. Selfishness is rampant." So beautiful, no? See, so there are so many winners of Kaun Banega Crorepati, but I've never received a WhatsApp naming a single person. That this person made a mark, the others earned a bank balance. So this in fact answers your question, no? If he was competitive and he wanted to be the winner, it would have been one ending. But when he came from another space, it was a different kind of victory, a much greater and potent victory. So that's also self-giving, sometimes giving away something because it will benefit the whole rather than just wanting it for yourself. And now we come to a passage from Savitri, last passage for today. Our seekings are short-lived experiments made by a wordless and inscrutable power, testing its issues from inconscient night to meet its luminous self of truth and bliss. It peers at the real through the apparent form. It labors in our mortal mind and sense, amid figures of ignorance, in the symbol pictures drawn by word and thought. It seeks the truth to which all figures point. So there's something in us which seeks the truth to which all appearances, all figures point. It looks for the source of light with vision's lamp, not with the mind's lamp, but with vision's lamp, darshan. It works to find the doer of all works. So it's looking to find who is the doer of all works. The unfelt self within, who is the guide. The unknown self above, who is the goal. So the unfelt self within is the psychic being. The unknown self above, the Jivatma, who is the goal. All is not here a blinded nature's task. A word, a wisdom watches us from on high. A witness sanctioning her will and works. So this is such a reassurance. Many times in Savitri, Sri Aurobindo keeps assuring us of something watching over us. There are lines like a mother wisdom brooded over the world, or calm eyes divine regard the human race. And then here again, a word, a wisdom watches us from on high, a witness sanctioning her will and works, an eye unseen in the unseeing vast. There is an influence from a light above. There are thoughts remote and sealed eternities. A mystic motive drives the stars and suns. They are not non-living objects. There is an intelligence, a mystic motive drives the stars and suns. In this passage, from a deaf, unknowing force to struggling consciousness and transient breath, a mighty supernature waits on time. So this is all a passage from unconsciousness to a struggling force to a mighty supernature which is to be ours waits on time. The world is other than we now think and see. Our lives a deeper mystery than we have dreamed. Our minds are starters in the race to God. Our souls deputed selves of the Supreme. Across the cosmic field, through narrow lanes, asking a scanty dole from fortune's hands, and garbed in beggar's robes, there walks the One. So beautiful. Across the cosmic field, one field is the field we see, but he's saying the whole cosmos is a field. So across the cosmic field through narrow lanes, so we have the whole cosmos as our field, but because of our ego, we are walking narrow lanes. Across the cosmic field through narrow lanes, asking a scanty dole. A dole is we beg, no? Give me something. Asking a scanty dole from fortune's hands. We are always asking, give me this, give me that, let this go well, let that go well. And garbed in a beggar's robe, there walks the One with a capital O. So that one who owns the universes, who has the whole cosmos as his field, trapped in the ego, walks a narrow lane, asks a scanty dole from fortune's hands. Very beautiful. I'll just read these last lines. Just feel them in your heart. A mystic motive drives the stars and suns. In this passage from a deaf, unknowing force to struggling consciousness and transient breath, a mighty supernature waits on time. The world is other than we now think and see. Our lives a deeper mystery than we have dreamed. Our minds are starters in the race to God. Our souls deputed selves of the Supreme. Across the cosmic field through narrow lanes, asking a scanty dole from fortune's hands, and garbed in beggar's robes, there walks the One. This was page 168, 169, Savitri. Let's end with 3 ohms. Om.